Hey folks. Unfortunately, this week, some members of the Deep Listens community in the southern United States were impacted by Hurricane Helen. The storm devastated much of the southern coast, but the town of Asheville, North Carolina was hit especially hard by flooding, leaving many without water, food, shelter, or power. If you can, I'd like to ask you to donate to belovedasheville.com to help support food transportation into Asheville, as well as other recovery efforts at this crucial time. That is belovedasheville.com. Thank you. Now on to our weird show about video games and sometimes other stuff.
Great.
Well, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that works.
I'm going to start Audacity.
So we're still doing the backups.
Yes, because if someone hits stop or if tracks get out of sync.
Okay, then we still need to do the clap later when he's back.
Yes. I'm going to eat this bagel.
Oh, bagels are only good when they're made in New York. It's because of the water. Did you know that? Did you know that fact? That bagels are only good in New York?
It's a good bagel.
Well, it can't be a good bagel because it wasn't made in New York, because the water in New York makes the bagels good. It's the only place in the world that the bagels are good. Did you know that?
Are these the same people who have never left the city of New York?
Maybe.
I'm back, sorry.
It'd be weird if he was also getting a bagel.
Oh, he's getting a bagel?
Are you getting a bagel?
No.
Oh, never mind.
Hello, good people, and welcome to the contours of our Emersonian mind, here on Off the Deep End, a Deep Listens podcast where we cover role-playing video games in depth. I'm your host, Braden Arbitrary Water, Redacted, the Caesar Catalina of this podcast. Joining me, as always, the Mayor Frank Cicero of the podcast, Chris Zombie Pie Redacted.
I recently went from battery-powered nose hair trimmers to hand crank nose hair trimmers, and I actually prefer the hand crank ones.
Further disrupting our republic in this podcast is, of course, Adam Borgmaster Redacted, the WoW Platinum of this podcast.
These references are going to age like stale milk.
No one's going to listen to this podcast after the week we put it out. It's fine.
Oh.
I mean, you make jokes about stale milk, but we do have lactose intolerant viewers out there, so I don't know why you decided to target
What
them.
if it aged like raw milk?
Bigotry.
It's pure. It's clean.
I mean, I'd say those references were stale the moment that movie came out, but that's just me.
I'm sorry that I've seen cinema today. While the rest of you were sitting at home picking your noses, I was experiencing true art.
Well, ZP was trimming his nose hair.
Yeah.
That's right. But today, we return to the topic of the subject we were previously talking about in the last podcast, which came out some time ago, which is video games that came out on consoles, but originally came out on PC, that belong to the genre known as role-playing games.
If you think about it, you play a role in every game.
Someone pointed this out. We didn't define what a role-playing game was in the or a role-playing game podcast. Don't you think we should do that, Braden?
Absolutely not.
I think you should eat shit.
I'm against this.
Why are you so mean to me sometimes? All I try to do is add good ideas to the podcast, and all you do is tell me that I'm a bad person.
But is he wrong?
Speaking of good ideas, did you know it's a good idea to back us on Patreon at patreon.com/deeplistens? $3 will get you access to the Oji-san cast, a bonus monthly podcast where me, ZP, and one Peter Busby cover anime that is probably old or weird. You can also put a game in the Deep Listens fan pick slush pile, which will play like the last time we played those video games that were on portable consoles.
Yeah, and you can also be a part of our Discord, which has had some, let's say, discussions that I have spearheaded. Important discussions. There is no discussion that ZP pioneers on the Deep Listens Discord that is not worthy of pontification, of debate, scholarly debate.
You know, ZP, if you just spoilered out those memes, like, you wouldn't get in trouble so much.
Like the reproduction habits of the Mega Mans in the world of the battle networks.
They're computer programs. They reproduce by being copied to a thumbstick.
Well, what the government told me not to copy that floppy, Braden.
You gonna listen to what the government fucking tells you to do?
No. Not
Anyway,
in this day and age.
Speaking of floppy disks were a medium that was used for most of the video games we covered in the first half of this episode. Now we move on to the exciting world of CD-ROMs, with the advent of the 5th generation of consoles.
Now, we should probably touch on where CRPGs were in the early to mid 90s, which is where we left off last time.
They were okay. Not
the mid 90s is a weird time for a lot of CRPGs.
And that's because the big series that would have been ported to consoles all kind of pooped themselves and died.
Or
around
they
the same time.
Got caught up in tech debt.
Yeah, it was a matter of like the old school franchises such as Wizardry had been built on, let's say, DOS, and the switch to Windows, or if you're one of the rare studios that decided to invest in making stuff on Apple, like it was now moving to visually
you were Bungie,
visually based systems to display information and or interfaces. And while a majority of people who had been working with DOS were very enthusiastic because it was just so much easier to program things on Windows versus DOS, there was a learning curve. There was a pretty big learning curve. And in particular, like there were even like compatibility issues that we won't get into, but the old stuff kind of petered out and made way to maybe some of the biggest games ever made.
But in between that, there's the awkward middle period.
Yep.
The Dark Ages, ranging roughly from 1994 to 1996.
Anyone who says that like the 360 PS3 era is the dark age of the CRPG, you don't even know. This is maybe the actual Dark Ages, is the switch to DirectX and Windows.
Thunderscape was a video game.
If you say so. And we can identify that it was a dark age because CRPGs stopped being ported to consoles for a while.
Well, they did keep getting ported to consoles, but A, only in Japan, and B, usually of older games. So I want to talk about the PS1 Japan-only port of Ultima Underworld. because it's a weird little thing.
From what I
Now-
saw, it looks like it's at least better than what From was putting out on the PS1.
Like, this is a weird thing that was specific in the Japanese era, like development circles of the PS1. They got a lot of old school PC-88, PC-98, like old school Japanese computer games that got up-resed and up-ported to the PlayStation 1. There is a PlayStation 1 Zork game. And I've been meaning to like share this because I don't know if it was a Yuzo Koshiro soundtrack, but it might as well. Like, they got one of the people from that Streets of Rage team that was not Yuzo Koshiro to do the music for it, and it's insane. But there were quite a few of those old school PC games they had their niche in Japan, and they all came to the PlayStation 1, but exclusively in Japan. Like, people were gobbling up these like weird games, which is, obviously a lot of the studios that we talked about last podcast, like Surtech, SSI, they're not in a good spot. Goddamn, even Dungeons and Dragons was not in a good spot, as Braden might. Articulate.
There's Menzo Baranzan, there's Ravenloft. Those were kind of the games from D&D in that period. And then, we don't need to talk about Descent to Undermountain. I don't need to talk about Descent to Undermountain again.
No.
D&D games in a weird spot in the mid-90s. Dungeon Hack.
There's that
a
fighting
D&D
game, right?
Slayer.
Don't you
Keep
dare.
For
Don't
the
you dare bring it up.
3DO.
Don't you
So-
dare
Adam
bring it up.
Workmaster Redacted's favorite 3DO game.
So, on your timeline, is this before or after the release of Wizardry 7 and 8?
So, Wizardry 7 was 92. It came out on the PSX in, I think, 95, 96.
Okay.
Wizardry 8 did not come out on the PC until 2001 and was ported nowhere. Because Surtech immediately went out of business after it came out.
Very tortured game development also, from the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Wizardry was not. Wizardry 8, it's a miracle that game actually was good, all things considered. But yeah.
Ultima 8 also kind of put that franchise on a bit of a spiral. We already talked about Ultima 9. Anyway, but consoles. Ultima Underworld.
All right, Ultima Underworld. It seems okay enough for what it is. That PS1
It made
version.
that game fully polygonal.
And that was a very big thing.
That's a weird, because Ultima Underworld is all sprite based, and it does the pseudo 3D stuff. It does some cool stuff with 3D environments, but it came out in 92, so it was limited in what it could do. And the PSX version, it's all polygons.
I guess the weirdest thing about Ultimate Underworld is that it leads to a lot, and I do mean a lot, of weird evolutionary dead ends in CRPGs, because people tried to chase after Ultima Underworld's 3D-ness and trickery, and different studios had different approaches in terms of how to do that. You had
one of those worked.
You had something like Stonekeep, and then you had
Stonekeep is not trying to be Ultima Underworld,
but it tried to solve the problem of, well, people want to be 3D now, so
Stonekeep solves the problem with pre-rendering everything.
Yeah. Anyway, so this game that you played and forced us to play, it's not the PC version. Very dramatically not the PC version.
It is the PC version,
But
in terms of how it played. But also it isn't, because their elegant solution to a game with mostly mouse-driven control is you just press a button and make a goddamn cursor appear on the middle of the screen.
Which, to be fair, most PC ports to PS1 were doing that from the beginning.
Yes.
It's just, it was like a Sim City.
Yeah.
Not RPGs.
Do you know what it kind of reminded me of, Braden? And this is very unfair to this game, is it reminded me of the cursor pause if you want to use the cursor combat system of Lord Banniff's Deceit on the Game Boy, where it really is turn-based when you decide to pause to move your cursor around, but then once the cursor is off, it's technically all in real time. But this game is much better and functional. I guess the problems start to arise when the combat gets a little bit more, not necessarily complicated, but more visually heavy.
Or
you can tell that the game
casting spells.
Yeah, when it's trying to do the more typical Ultima things. I would even say Ultima has had a very weird relationship with its whole reagent system, but when it's trying to do those sorts of things, those esoteric CRPG-isms...
In Underworld, it's the runes.
It doesn't feel good. It really doesn't. And it kind of breaks my heart.
It's clumsy. Without a mouse. And there were not that many concessions made to adjust for the fact that there is not a mouse. But as a weird little artifact, as a weird little thing, because once again, this port only came out in Japan. It did get a fan translation, which is just, the DOS version's script, I think last year. So you can check it out if you want to play a more 3D version of Ultima Underworld on a PlayStation.
The thing that kind of gets me slightly confused about this game is that it seemed that the PlayStation 1 was kind of like this all-encompassing demographic machine, whereas like the N64 skewed young, although the N64 was completely irrelevant in Japan, and that thing was carried by the North American audience and a few pockets of Europe. But the PlayStation 1 skewed slightly older. And I've always wondered, or I was wondering while playing this game, is like, was this meant to be an on-ramp? Was this meant to be like a further solidification of Ultima's status as like a thing for computer nerd culture in Japan circa the 80s and 90s? Like, who was this for?
So I might have some ideas about that, because the PC-98 in the early 90s was still going strong, and it was mostly weird first-person dungeon crawlers, some of which took inspiration from Ultima Underworld, some of which didn't. And,
many of which were pornography.
Many of which were pornography. Like, Kingsfield was a launch window game for the PS1 in Japan. Mm-hmm. Space Griffin VF9 was a launch window game in Japan. It's like, what was it, Time Gal or something like that? There's other ones. So,
yeah.
Whatever the game was, but first-person dungeon crawlers, with 3D and free movement, were a thing in Japan on the PS1. So it's more like Ultima Underworld was thrown onto the pile because the audience was there for that kind of thing.
They had to have one of those to like be competitive, or they wanted to check the box to a degree.
Well, it's more like people were buying that kind of thing in Japan on the PlayStation, so they made one for the PlayStation in Japan.
Yeah, it's fine. It's totally fine. I just so was it, like, again, I get to my point, was this meant to be an on-ramp?
I think it was just meant to be someone thought Ultima Underworld was cool and said, what if we shoved this on a PlayStation?
And again, that gets to my point of, like, it's awkward in whether or not it's going to be, like, a truly authentic Ultima game, or it's going to be the consolification of
that game.
This.
It is the same game as it is on DOS.
Yeah.
Just polygons.
And that's cool.
Yes.
That's kind of cool.
Okay.
It doesn't have the best frame rate.
Most games don't on the PlayStation.
Yeah. And I mean, this is notable as an early attempt at figuring out how to get the in the CD era to get the CRPGs to translate onto consoles. And that's something that developers all over the world would struggle with throughout, the fifth and sixth console generations and into the PS3 360 era. So this is notable as an early attempt at that, instead of just, turning Ultima 3 into Dragon Quest, actually trying to make the thing work as intended on consoles.
Is the thing.
And I guess like
they even only slightly anime-ize the portraits. They don't super anime stylize the portraits like some other games.
Yeah. And I guess we do need to point out, like, while PlayStation sometimes is a name that we closely associate with the JRPG franchise, like, we talked about this when we discussed Suikoden, but it was kind of a desert in the first couple of years on that console in terms of RPGs. So
until FF7.
Getting an RPG on that platform was probably a big get for them. Like, getting an Ultima, like an actual name on the box says Ultima, was probably a big deal for that company, or in terms of marketing it. So good. I don't know, Braden, as someone who played the original,
I wouldn't recommend it over playing the DOS version simply by virtue of controls, but it's neat.
Yeah, it's neat.
My point is more that it is an interesting, weird little window into the kinds of ports that were being made during this era.
And as Borgmaster pointed out, it wasn't like the United States or North America was making any of these weird kind of like ports, because the genre kind of died.
No one cared. I mean, it didn't die so much as it took a year or two for everyone to stop making terrible CD-ROM games based on some sort of dog shit adventure game named Pissed.
Yeah, Pissed. Yeah. And I do want to reiterate that PC98 games were still being ported to the PlayStation, just in Japan. Like occasionally one would make it over here for some reason. Like, again, Space Griffin VF9. Check it out. But that was the exception to the rule. And there were still, CRPG style games being made for the PlayStation, Kingsfield. But you didn't get the ports of those major series. The major series didn't exist on the PC in North America or Europe to port to consoles. So that's why things paused for a while.
I wonder if it was because, like, the PlayStation was easy to do that for, because, like, it's not just the PC88, it's the PC98, and then a lot of MSX stuff got ported to the PlayStation. I wonder if it was just, like, easier to do that.
But the thing is, tons of non-RPG games were ported from the PC to the PlayStation.
Yeah, I mean, there's that PS1, though technically there's also the Saturn version of Snatcher.
Even in North America, I dare anyone listening to this to try to play XCOM, the original XCOM, using a PlayStation controller. I dare you.
It supported the PlayStation mouse.
Speaking of the PlayStation mouse, there's even more weird stuff, right, Braden?
That's right.
It's an admirable attempt, but I think that's kind of it.
An admirable attempt at what?
A dungeon crawl experience with the novelty on the console.
Okay,
that's right. Ultima Underworld. But what else came out? Perhaps one of the most important and popular video games ever made.
Well, I was going to say that after that point, we hit 1997, which is when CRPGs come back.
Yeah, they come back. CRPGs are back, motherfucker.
You got your Fallout. You might have heard of this.
Yeah, Fallout, Descent to Undermountain.
Yeah.
Yes, from Fallout, based on the hit TV show.
Daggerfall was probably in a playable state by that point.
You weren't falling through the environment
much
in that. But yeah, it's oh god. I know, Braden, Wasteland was still pretty cool, right?
Where's this going?
I'm pointing out the fact that there are maybe people on a specific CRPG board that would bristle at the notion
your fucking time.
that would bristle at the notion of you calling Diablo a CRPG. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, those people. No, fuck them. I don't give a fuck.
It's an action RPG on the computer. What do you want?
If we're gonna get fucking genre dicks in here,
yeah, you mean me?
I want you to eat shit and die.
I'm not saying that's a perspective I have, but
then why did you bring it up?
I'm saying that those people existed.
They don't need to be given credence.
Yeah, those people exist to piss off.
Hey, guess what? There are people out there who think that we should reinstitute monarchy, and there are people out there who think we should voluntarily euthanize the people who can't work, and there are people out there who believe that Myst is a good video game, and we shouldn't give any of them credence.
So Diablo was a big deal.
Was a big deal.
Wait, are we skipping over Baldur's Gate?
That's 98, motherfucker.
Oh wait, I thought Diablo was also 98.
No, Diablo's 96. Tail end of 96. Beginning of 97, depending on when you want to I think it officially came out like December 31st, 1996.
Yeah.
But a year later, in early 98, Electronic Arts published and put out a PS1 port of Diablo.
Hey,
you ever hear about this game?
Diabolical port, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Diablo. I don't know, what do you want? It's a pretty straightforward game.
Podcast over.
Like, I mean, it's Diablo. You know, you click on things, hit them, they die, or you cast spells on things and they die. They hit you. You need to drink potions. There's a town. You identify items. You sell things. You buy potions if you need them. And then you go to a dungeon. It's Diablo.
Playing this PlayStation 1 port of Diablo was just a further codification of the fact to me that Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 are two very different games, and there is a reason why Diablo 2 became the biggest video game in the history of the world.
Yes, why Diablo 2 is... Every video game is secretly Diablo 2.
But Diablo 1...
Diablo 1 is how you get from the old school RPGs to Diablo 2.
Yeah. Diablo 1 is way more of a classical capital R roguelike in a lot of ways. It's just real time, and the loot lust part of it is almost incidental to its design.
Right.
Yeah, loot wasn't the point, but it was there.
But this PlayStation version of Diablo,
it's fine. Mostly fine.
It is a mostly complete one-to-one translation of that game to the PlayStation. It's running at a lower resolution.
It's got some atrocious load times.
Those are pretty
load
bad.
times.
Like the load times, the frame rate, like those aren't good, but otherwise
the UI is a little wonky. but it is that game, and I think it controls better than I was expecting.
I mean,
navigating the UI is a little clonk, but there is a surprising amount of forethought for a game from 1998, a port from 1998 of like, hey, here's how you quick assign spells to your quick spells list.
right.
And switch between inventory tabs. That said,
God, I wish I had those function keys.
Did Diablo 1 even have function keys?
You could.
But it helps that Diablo 1 didn't have that many inputs you had to map.
No.
No.
And it's the other thing I want to talk about is this game. One of the things that really helped make Diablo 1 the mega hit that it was is the presence of online and the newly created BattleNet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we could the history of Diablo 1 is well documented. There's plenty of evidence and talk and oral history about that game, and also the part where all of your player files were stored locally, so everyone just cheated the fuck out of it. And it just seems like it would be a miserable time if you didn't get into a game with friends. But this version of Diablo has 2-player split screen. It takes almost an entire memory card to save a character. But if you have 2 memory cards that you are willing to set aside, you and an unfortunate sibling, friend, or family member could play Diablo 1 together on the same screen. This is what, like 16 years before Diablo. When did Diablo 3 come out on consoles? Was it 2014? 2013, 2014?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more than a
13.
decade before that.
Again, like Blizzard had a weird crease where they took making PC or console ports of their things. They gave their console division and partners money, and they told them to really cobble together the best things they could. Maybe the most notorious or best example would have to be that StarCraft 64 port, which it's not a great version of StarCraft.
They shoved all of StarCraft onto an N64
hot damn, they got it to work.
I think you can play all of StarCraft.
I think the weird thing about that PlayStation Diablo port is that it, and then to a degree, Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain Blood Omen, really led to like this deluge of action RPGs on the PlayStation that persisted well into the PlayStation 2. Obviously, we'll get to Dark Alliance, but like you had a lot of those kind of mashy mash Diablo likes, like Champions of Norath, which was set in the EverQuest universe, which was a IP owned by Sony. So of course, but they kind of proved that the genre could work on a console, and they weren't wrong. They really weren't wrong.
So yes,
I think I liked it only because I'm not the hugest fan. I'm not a big fan of the default mouse controls in Diablo 1. I wouldn't say that I was super excited by the way that the controller input, and yes, I did play this using a controller because I was curious.
So this is what it took.
But it didn't give me... It's functional. You definitely have weird situations where you're trying to like aim things, especially projectile-based spells, and you just can't quite get the granularity with how you're turning.
The
that's
tiles.
Super frustrating with specific parts.
But, however, in some, you know, the original Diablo is a little stiffer, I think, than people remember because it's still turn-based under the hood.
Sure.
I think it is actually a pretty exemplary way to play that game if you did not have a decent computer. Now, the weird thing about this port, I think, is the part where it had a pretty small print run and seemingly like never got a reprint, which is why it's one of those PS1 games that is like $150 complete in box. And
Yeah.
because, you know, Diablo 1 was huge. It was a phenomenon. And I'm just surprised that I guess maybe by this point PCs were becoming affordable and mainstream enough in, you know, the Windows 95 era that you could probably get Diablo if you wanted it, and it's not like that game was super demanding. It didn't require a graphics card for one.
Unlike Quake.
Unlike, well, you could play Quake in software too. You shouldn't,
Oh, okay.
but you could.
You could also play Quake on a console.
Yeah, you can play Quake on the N64.
Yeah, you sure can.
It's got colored lighting and looks like mud.
Got
And
bad
runs
music.
at 10 frames a second.
Such a bad version of that game. Holy
Do
shit.
do not play Quake 64. Hello.
Hey man, 10 frames is all you need.
Doom 64, on the other hand, pretty good.
Yeah.
Quake 64, fucking disaster. Anyways,
Yeah.
so
Actually, moving on, there is one thing I want y'all to explain.
Hmm.
What is the Infinity Engine?
okay. So
Back in the 90s, I was on a famous TV show.
Uh-huh.
So these two doctors decided they wanted to quit making
medicine.
They wanted to quit doing medicine, and instead were like, we love games. Let's go make some video games. And so as part of that, they made a mech game called Shattered Steel that is otherwise pretty mediocre and forgettable. They helped work on MDK2 because Shiny was too busy making Messiah. And they were working on an engine for an MMO project that never got off the ground.
But
Called the Infinity Engine.
But the Infinity Engine, that failed MMO, gave way to them having the core components to build themselves to Wizards of the Coast and the Dungeons and Dragons IP, and saying, "Hey, we can totally make a Baldur's
video
Gate game."
Yeah,
and it turned out that engine actually was a perfect fit for Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, it turns out that Baldur's Gate was hotly anticipated. It was because, as we previously mentioned, D&D video games not in a great place in the mid 90s. If you want a bad time, play Iron and Blood. Or
so what was the last good advanced Dungeons and Dragons game before Baldur's Gate?
I mean, I think those Ravenloft games have some gas, but the actual correct answer is probably
Westwood
stuff. The stuff Westwood made.
Yeah.
So Eye of the Beholder 2.
Oh, that's right. Eye of the Beholder 2 came out before or after Lands of Lore.
No, it was before Lands of Lore.
Okay, then I would go with Lands of Lore.
Lands of Lore is not a D&D game.
Oh, you're right. Anyway,
so it's been a while.
BioWare created this engine for Baldur's Gate, and they started to license it. And
they licensed it to their partners at Interplay, who
Black Isle
had
Studios
their own,
specifically, also.
And who had their own internal RPG developer called Black Isle, who then used that engine tech to make
Planescape and the Icewind
three
Dale
very good video games.
Yep.
Of their own.
And then Beamdog sought out the license and then bought it again so as that they could make all of those enhanced editions.
That's 2012.
That's much later.
The far distant future.
Anyways, so there was actually like this entire division to BioWare that was taking these engines that basically took the D&D system 3.5E or 3, and it would do the math for you.
It wasn't 3.5 yet.
So it would do the math for you. It would
was
do all the
second
calculations. And when you play KOTOR, you can kind of like, it's maybe the easier one to detect it, but you can totally tell that the game is rolling a dice in terms of determining whether your hits land or miss. And so that's what the Infinity Engine was good at, was you would have the stat sheets.
The D&D math.
You would have the D&D look and feel and logic, but it did the math for you.
So now we have a big CRPG franchise, a new one, a new shiny one, after those old ones had gone by the wayside. And as such, the big popular CRPG franchise needs a console port.
That's right. So, slated for 2000, a British developer called Runecraft, whose credits mostly consist of licensed PS1 games, including Barbie Super Sports and Barbie Explorer and Scrabble for the Game Boy Advance, were tasked to make a version of Baldur's Gate for the PlayStation. This did not come to fruition. However, there is a leaked build of that game that leaked like 2009 or something that you can play technically from start to finish, in the same way you can technically play that leaked N64 build of Dinosaur Planet from start to finish. And
so, Braden, can you tell the viewers why you think that Baldur's Gate port never came out?
It's fucking terrible, man.
It's bad.
People should look up YouTube footage, or track down the ISOs where you can, of this thing, because maybe there's a reason why this port was never finished and released. And not just because, it seemed like there were technical hurdles.
Technical hurdles? So, like what?
So what if you tried to make an entirely mouse-based video game on a controller, and your solution was, I don't know, make the D-pad move a shitty mouse cursor around?
Well, that's what they always did before, so why doesn't it work here?
Because Baldur's Gate is real-time with pause and has some RTS-ish elements to it, which are also a little complex for that kind of thing. So imagine, if you will, Baldur's Gate, but it looks like mud.
Mm-hmm.
It moves like mud because
real bad frame rate again.
Once again, unfinished, but it moves like mud. The music is not implemented in this build, or at least not fully implemented. And
how are the load times?
Oh, they're bad. Holy shit.
They're agonizing. They're agonizing.
Which I don't know if it's because it's poorly optimized, or the world of Baldur's Gate is just, once you go into the open world, it's just too big and they didn't know how to coordinate things off.
It's just too big.
But this is this is the reason why when Interplay realized that, oh, this ain't gonna work, and then they also tried to make a Sega Dreamcast port of the original Baldur's Gate. Like,
Sure.
they really tried. Interplay was a poorly run company, but they really tried,
Yeah.
and
So
it didn't work.
it didn't work. And there's a reason why it didn't work. The funny coda to me talking about this is I think those Beamdog console ports of Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition are totally fine. If you are playing on a lower difficulty.
Yes. I would also say, if you were a PS2 owner, there is a reason why they ended up making Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and Dark Alliance 2.
Yeah.
And while I don't think that those games are one-to-one the same thing, but they realized that you can't really actually make Baldur's Gate 1 for a PlayStation or an Xbox or whatever. You have to build something from the ground up. And the engine that you make from the ground up is going to more or less be more action-y based rather than real time with pause.
Yeah. So, wow, Chris, what a great segue.
Oh, I just said okay. You know what? Do your segue, but I'm going to bring us back because I wanted to mention something.
Okay. This is why I should have written notes.
Haha.
You people with your ideas.
So
go ahead.
So the PS1 era, the popular CRPGs, your Fallouts, your Baldur's Gates, your Daggerfalls when it worked, your Ultima 9s, let's say,
Mm.
they could not translate as well to controller schemes as the older, let's say, Might and Magic games or any of those 80s 90s games that didn't really need a mouse most of the time. So it was just harder. It was harder to translate. The engines weren't as compatible, and so they mostly didn't do it outside of Diablo.
And most of them were not they were too technically complex for a PlayStation. The N64, what is that? The N64 has 3 RPGs. We already covered them.
The N64 had 3 megabytes of ROM. No one was making RPGs for that thing. And this is all in North America and Europe. In Japan, in the late 90s, with the advent of the Windows PC, they kind of took a different turn in computer RPG development because RPG Maker came out in 95. And that's kind of changed the way they did things.
I've played Corpse Party.
Yes, you have.
So
just the whole CRPG scene went in a completely different direction in Japan from anywhere else. And because most of them were smaller, single person, passion projects.
Scene.
Yeah, the Dojin scene, those didn't really get ported to consoles because they weren't big enough. So that just goes off in its own direction, does its own thing, and we don't see it again until the PSP.
Yeah. I think that's a really salient point.
Okay, now I'll allow you to transition to the
Anyway,
PSP.
Speaking of transitions to the PS2 era, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance comes out in 2001 and reflects a perhaps more sustainable way of doing things, which is to just make a game for consoles first and assume that people can kind of understand nerd shit.
Yeah, and, it's a Diablo clone that was made for consoles.
Yeah, it's a Diablo clone that was made for consoles. And surprise, surprise, a lot of the things that make that Diablo 1 console port mostly work are also the reasons why Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and all of those Snowblind engine games work. Except for the Bard's Tale, which ain't great, and Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, which I will play on stream at some point because I hate myself, but I love Balls Guarana.
You sure do. But yeah,
Guarana Soda's fun.
It's got ideas.
Yeah, it's a if you like soda that tastes like your teeth is actively rotting while you're drinking it, highly recommend drinking some Guarana soda. Very big in South America for a reason. But that doesn't mean...
So your Dark Alliances come out. You
Yeah.
know, there's those like Marvel licensed beat 'em ups that are almost adjacent to being like that as well. And then you have okay, so is Deus Ex an RPG?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Is it?
Yes.
You work on building up stats,
You have stats,
and
the stats go up.
Okay, fine.
You have
or even
skill
like
points.
skill checks throughout the worlds that you're exploring. It's a type of RPG. I mean,
Is it
I know
like
there's
Anachronox then?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it is if Ultima Underworld is an RPG, then Deus Ex is also an RPG. They made a version of Deus Ex for consoles, and I'm not talking about that Invisible War, which is just a video game made for consoles and also poop.
Because the original game is bad.
Are you saying the original? Wait, are you
No.
anti Deus Ex?
No. I thought we were making an Invisible War reference. Like,
No, I mean,
the console
I
version
don't-
of Invisible War is bad because Invisible War is bad.
Yeah, because that game was made for consoles.
Also, if you want a hater, I've always been ambivalent to Deus Ex.
Well, yeah, because it requires
Uh-huh.
more than
Uh-huh.
it requires player skill and you
Okay.
to pay attention to mechanics and engage with things, and
Don't
you
put
know the
points
game
into
asks
swimming.
things from the player as opposed to you, who wants everything fed to you
There's
like
like-
an airplane with a little baby
I guess-
spoon.
I guess the weird
I
thing
mean, I get
about
bored
Deus
playing
Ex,
it.
the thing about Deus Ex that always kind of like I think is a weird thing that did someone not notice this is it starts off with like this character sheet with all of these different skills that you can put points to. There's literally two things you want to put points into:
Pistols,
hacking. That's
and
it.
then eventually rifles.
But the good rifles don't come out until at least Hong Kong or at least late
you don't get
New York.
most good long guns until fairly late in the introductory area. But I want to talk about Deus Ex: The Conspiracy for the PlayStation 2, because this is a weirdo port. This isn't just, they just made Deus Ex. No, they went back into that video game and they changed level geometry so that it would function in a PlayStation 2 and keep a frame rate up. So in the initial Liberty Island level, there are way more walls everywhere to break line of sight so that they don't have to render as much. There are also like loading screens separating stuff in that very what they would later do with Thief, Deadly Shadows, and Deus Ex Invisible War. But
I decided to do something very weird, Braden. And I decided to pull up an ancient game FAQs for the PC version of Deus Ex. And then I started to play the PS2 version of Deus Ex, and I wanted to see what are the anachronisms, where does this game design start to get askew, and it's almost immediate. Like there's so many environments where the levels are just completely different. The good news is that it feels a lot more railroaded in that there's a lot of there are fewer environments
There are
that have
fewer
big empty
ways to
space.
get lost.
Yep. And
Because, but there are also fewer ways to break your way through areas you're not supposed to.
sure. And that's a good and a bad, because I remember the first time I played Deus Ex, I remember getting on Liberty Island, getting myrtleized by that bipedal mech at the entrance, and not really realizing what I was supposed to do to kind of like avoid that from happening.
Yeah.
And this game kind of prevents you from getting into that situation by showing you exactly where you need to go.
Yeah.
And to a degree, that makes it an odd way to like baby's first Deus Ex.
But you know, on a basic level, it is still mostly that game. But also, they changed the mechanics to make it easier for console people. So in the original Deus Ex, you have a like location-based health bar, which is both a plus and a minus. Where if one of your locations loses all of its health, you probably die. In this game, you just have a flat health bar, and also you don't have to worry about inventory management because you just can keep everything you pick up. There's no inventory limit. In some ways, I think that might be preferable to some of the, let's say, fun stuff you have to do in Deus Ex 1 if you are, say, I don't know, playing with heavy weapons because you like to have fun. Because if you're playing Deus Ex for the second time and want to have fun, just pick a weird build. Go melee. Run around with the Dragon Tooth sword. I dare you. Reinstall Deus Ex right now, you coward. You there, listening at home. I dare you. Or you know, you could work on the rest of your backlog. I'm not here to judge.
I want. So I've been kind of thinking about this, Braden.
Mm-hmm.
And Borgmaster, feel free to throw things out there. So with Baldur's Gate, they ended up making something from the ground up because they realized that the base game was too big and that was just too much of a technological hurdle to make. They must have taken some form of like a debug or like the source code version of Deus Ex and then re-edited all of the maps, all of the
They
instancing.
went in there. This was not.
They went in there.
This is not a 1-to-1.
And they edited so as that the worlds would be smaller, more railroaded, and would kind of prevent a lot of technical fucky fuck, right?
Yes.
And they didn't avoid all of it. But is that more cost efficient than just making something from the ground up? Because what they had to do to make this game, it doesn't seem like it was easy.
In some ways, it feels like it's going back to the early Famicom ports of PC games, where they are making intentional and actual design changes to make it more palatable to a console audience and also make it run on the damn thing.
Yeah.
And
So
I know
this
people
is-
who will... Go ahead.
Oh, so this is the PS2 version of turning Ultima 3 into Dragon Quest.
Yes. I think kind of. Like, I know people who will sort of go to bat for this version in a it was the version I played sort of way. I would argue maybe not the version you'd want to play, but nonetheless, they put Deus Ex, it is a weird, truncated, compromised port that still retains most of the main gameplay elements.
And I'm guessing this port was a traumatic enough experience that for the second game, they just went and made it for consoles first.
Well, that and PC games were dead.
And also
Somewhere between
Deus Ex and Half-Life 2,
Yeah.
PC games were dead.
Yeah.
And so because PC gaming was dead and no games were being made for the PC anywhere at any time,
No, never.
if you wanted to make a CRPG, you had to make it for the consoles.
Yeah, or you lived in Eastern Europe and were making Gorky 17.
Oh, of course.
Which did not come out on consoles. No, so here's the actual thing is Neverwinter Nights is too complex.
Yep.
To work on a console, especially with the faux MMO stylings it has going on and the persistent worlds and all of the online connectivity. That would not have made sense on a PS2, even if I bet a PS2 could probably technically run Neverwinter Nights. Maybe an Xbox could. I know that for sure.
So because we're in the early aughts now, we should probably bring up that MMOs exist.
MMOs exist.
Yeah, so we're talking about
Final
CRPGs
Fantasy 11
and what happened to them. What had happened was in the late 90s, the internet was good enough that you could connect computers together for video gaming. So what if you had a multiplayer RPG with a lot of people? That was massive, you could say. And so some amount of our CRPG development went into the massively multiplayer realm.
What if the NPCs weren't actually NPCs? They were real peoples.
Oh, you still treated them like NPCs.
Oh, like Meridian 51.
That's a deep cut. Good lord. Good lord.
I mean, I was gonna say Anarchy Online, but okay.
Yeah, no, like Meridian 51. Or was it Meridian 59?
I think it was Meridian 59. Yeah. I was playing my Neverwinter Nights on the AOL.
OG Neverwinter Nights. The mud.
God. How many of you
are we going to have to explain muds to people at some point?
Yeah, I don't want
what
to.
What episode is going to end? What episode is going to require us to explain the concept of multi-user dungeons?
The episode where we end up playing NetHack because we pulled off the Band-Aid and we just want to feel pain, Braden.
I'm not going to play NetHack.
There's going to be a NetHack episode.
We cannot make me play NetHack.
One day you will play Dwarf Fortress.
No, Dwarf Fortress. There's a version of Dwarf Fortress with a functional UI now. And that game's just like a very obsessive management sim.
And also a man trying to pay for his medical treatment for his brother.
And some brothers who need some medical care. And good on them.
So, trying to do a multiplayer role-playing game on consoles was tricky in the late 90s because your PlayStation 1s, your N64s, your Saturns were not made with the internet in mind.
No, they were
the Dreamcast was, and you got a console-only, Phantasy Star thing that was weird, and
PSO is a big deal. PM.
Yes, and then the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox had varying degrees of internet capability. And so people try to put a couple of MMOs on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Final Fantasy 11.
And that's its own story. That's just as weird as anything that we talk about. I just want to say that was happening. I don't think we should cover that.
No. We've already covered FF11 on this podcast in its modern form. We don't need to get into what I imagine the experience was like for people who played that thing on consoles, especially Americans who played that thing on consoles. I'm good. But yeah, so in a lot of, this is something that obviously can be disputed, but basically RPGs in the early aughts, the computer side of things definitely became a lot more niche, and the original creators of the big ones either went out of business because they were Interplay and were a poorly run company who mismanaged projects, and it at a constant, continual basis, or you adapt. And that comes to us with the Microsoft Xbox, which originally was codenamed the Direct Xbox, because it was a box that would be able to use DirectX.
And we mentioned the fact, Braden, that you adapted.
Yeah.
Two of the studios that adapted the best, we've already mentioned the first one, BioWare.
Yeah.
The
Hear
other
about this,
one,
guys?
yeah. The other one was Bethesda.
Some guys in Bethesda, Maryland. They made a
Yeah, they made that Ultimate Underworld knockoff. They call
Yeah,
it like
Arena.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They made Daggerfall, the game that at some point I will force either Gino or M to play.
The game that one day will be a functioning video game.
Yeah,
It kind of
Daggerfall
is
Unity is
today.
great.
Yeah.
Oh,
Daggerfall
okay.
Unity makes it to where you don't fall through
Like,
the ground when you're
Daggerfall
going.
Unity makes that game a playable game unless you are playing it let's say as a bard.
Okay,
Or
so it only
something.
took like 20 something years. All right, yeah.
Yeah, listen, Daggerfall's great.
There's
But
a reason why they only made one Daggerfall, though.
yeah, there's a reason why Daggerfall is Daggerfall and no one else has tried to make Daggerfall, except for apparently the former Daggerfall devs who tried to kickstart a spiritual successor, which I want to see what that is. I'm not going to back it. I didn't back it, but I want to see what that is. But more importantly, there's a little game that came out in 2002 in May on PC and June on the Xbox. Chris, what is this game?
This is The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. And
Na, 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 na,
da, 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 da.
Anyway,
Anyways, this was a big deal for them because not only did Morrowind only come out console-wise on the Xbox, it was probably the only console that they could release that game on.
I mean, you hear Todd Howard talk about it, and apparently one of the reasons why that game will just have a really long load time every now and then is just because they are soft resetting the Xbox.
Yeah,
to
so
clear
that's
the memory cache.
that was the weird thing. Having the built-in hard drive was also one of the reasons why they felt comfortable working with the Xbox versus the PlayStation 2. But that's the weird thing that when I saw that interview and now I can't not see it, you can also tell that basically what they did is that they took almost a hex grid and plopped it on the world of Morrowind. And in each box, it loads up that box. And then when you exit that box, then it gets rid of all the previous box that you're in, and it loads up the next box that you just entered. But now it's reset the previous one. And that's a very novel way to deal with the fact that this is a large, if not massive at the time, open world RPG with its own ecosystem, flora and fauna, and those load times are long.
It's
They're very, very long.
Morrowind.
But
Yeah,
they made
it's
it work.
Morrowind. It's like Daggerfall, but it works and it's polygonal.
And
And
man,
yeah, it's on a tiny island instead of a landmass twice the size of the island of Great Britain in real size.
clearly the one that really broke the dam was Oblivion, and then once we get to Skyrim, it became the biggest release of that studio's like ever.
One of the biggest games of that decade.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
in
Morrowind
2002
is important because in 2002 they released it only a month after the PC version, whereas normally there was a bit of a wait to get the PC or the console version. And then 2, it was practically the same thing. It had all of the mechanics. They took advantage of dual analog movement, and there's some jank, but it still has that great atmosphere.
It is a one-to-one version of that game. It is
And-
not the version you should play
No.
in modern year.
Well, so here's the weird thing is Morrowind on the Xbox was a very important stepping stone to get to Oblivion and Skyrim. And there was a generation of people who got into the Elder Scrolls because of the Xbox version of Morrowind. And man, maybe it's just me realizing that I like Morrowind probably more than I like a lot of the
One day I'll play more than 3 hours of Morrowind with one character before restarting.
But I know all of the things, which is like, yeah, just pick one type of weapon and then just smash it over some dude's face like 10 to 12 times and then get your stats up and then you're set for fucking 10 hours.
I think the thing I want to kind of express with Morrowind is Oblivion is very much a game made for consoles. It's definitely going over there. Morrowind is a still an unabashedly PC game, but it's running on an Xbox. That is in stark contrast to the game that I would like to consider the Herald of the End, the death of the PC CRPG. In some ways,
the beginning of the end and the end of the beginning, you could say.
Yeah. So, this game holds a very special place in my heart because it is one of the first big RPGs I played.
Oh.
And it is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which came out on the Xbox in 2003 and did not come out on PC until the next year, which is where I played it.
So this is the inverse of the pattern.
This is the inverse. This is the end verse.
But KOTOR is still under the hood a CRPG.
Yes, it's using a weird watered down version of D&D 3rd edition. It has, I have been surprised by how many people are confused by D&D 3rd edition still. They're like, why?
THACO's not that hard.
It's not THACO. It's not THACO in 3rd edition.
Yeah, they got rid of it.
No, I'm just saying things.
Yeah, no, THACO's not that hard. The concept of armor class is not hard. You people are soft and weak, etc., etc. But KOTOR is
it's the
It's
game,
the inflection
basically.
point,
it's
right?
the inflection point.
It's the moment when people realized, okay, so
You
might
aren't
actually
porting PC games to console. You're porting console games to PC.
Yeah, it's
And that's
the
because
moment.
it works really well on a console. Like,
It
they
works
figured
on a
out
controller.
how to make D&D style gameplay work on a controller in real time, real time with pause. Behind the back, third person action game looking thing, but there's dice rolls that you don't see. The BioWare writing is there. It's a big game. There's a lot of worlds to go to. There's party members, there's characters.
There's
Does
a guy
the
who's
whole
like,
thing.
I don't trust you. Oh.
You
Yeah,
get your Canderous Ordo.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does a whole thing on consoles in a way that actually works. It's
Yes.
functional.
And hey, guess what? It was a very successful, beloved video game.
And it blew the minds of an entire young generation
Yeah.
who got their hands
Me
on
included.
it. And me included as well. And
Meanwhile, in
was a big deal.
2003, Troika was like the last bastion standing, and they weren't standing for very long.
You eventually get Obsidian, though.
Yeah, you get
The joke-
Well, yeah.
The joke always being that Obsidian was like
But
one
Obsidian
foot in the
was
grave.
making sequels to BioWare games during that period. And, KOTOR 2, still a console game, although don't play the console version of that game. has all the bugs in it still.
Dota 2 is definitely a video game beloved by most
people who want to come off as smart.
people who are smart.
No comment.
But
Freya is one of the reasons why I became a libertarian.
That's
Says
not-
Chris Zombie Pie Redacted.
that's the wrong interpretation of that game. But okay, everyone was a teenager at one point. So the Sexbox era, the PS2
Yes.
era, comes and goes. We now have high definition gaming on our high definition gaming boxes.
Yeah.
Half-Life 2 is ported to the Xbox. People are very mad about it. I don't remember why. But then the Xbox 360 comes out.
Yeah.
You get your Oblivions, as we've mentioned.
Yeah.
And Oblivion was made with the console in mind. It works. It worked just as well on 360 as on PC.
The PS3 version of all of those Bethesda games have the memory leak problems. Once again, don't play the PS3 versions of any of those games if you owned a PS3. Sorry, nerd.
I mean, even like Dungeon Siege 3 was a console game.
Yeah.
Dungeon Siege
God.
3.
The game that Obsidian wants you to forget about that they totally made.
The PC version of Dungeon Siege 3 does not have controller support, but also does not work like a game that should be played with a mouse and keyboard. Dungeon Siege 3 is fucking terrible.
It's not
secretly one of Obsidian's worst games.
And now that we're in the late aughts, North American RPG development is now becoming more console oriented with PC second, but using mechanics and styles from CRPGs but just having them work on consoles. You get your shooter RPGs, with your Mass Effects, and then eventually the Borderlands. You get BioShock, which was made for consoles first. So that's the actual Deus Ex that was made for consoles.
Yeah. Except BioShock doesn't have any of the things that make Deus Ex interesting.
Yeah, no, except it's not good. So that's going on. Japan is either a doujin scene or an MMO when it comes to CRPGs.
Yeah, when it comes to PC RPGs. Yeah.
And then it's Europe now who are the ones who are maintaining
still making RPGs for PCs.
Still making CRPGs.
Well, remember, this was also the weird time when those PC RPGs were always coming out for the Xbox 360 because Microsoft made it very easy to port Windows games into the 360. What was it, a few months after the release?
Risen.
Yeah, well, not just Risen. The big get for them was The Witcher 2.
That's right.
The Witcher 1 was a PC game.
The Witcher 1 was a PC game, but The Witcher 2 came out exclusively on Xbox 360 after its Windows and OS
X. And the console version of The Witcher 1 was canceled because CD Projekt almost went out of business making it.
And then the Polish government said, "We got you."
And now they are the biggest video game developer of all time in Poland somehow. Again, that Netflix series and the Phantom Liberty expansion sure did a lot of reputation laundering
of everything that led to
or
Cyberpunk.
What it's worth, I think Cyberpunk's totally fine now.
Now, sure.
Now
the human costs leading up to that, not so much.
No, I didn't play whatever version came out at launch. Sure did seem bad. Glad I didn't play that.
So now we're getting to the late aughts, early 2010s, and CRPGs, console RPGs, now mostly the same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's gone. We've gone full circle. The Ouroboros is here. It's just RPGs.
Yeah.
The delineation between CRPGs and console RPGs is dumb. You shouldn't make it. Yeah. Only weirdos will put that line in the sand.
And Pillars of Eternity came out on the Xbox pretty at the same time or soon after the PC.
No, it did not.
It did not.
No.
Oh, okay.
So then we go around to 2014 when Wasteland 2 and Divinity Original Sin came out, and suddenly you had unapologetically complex RPGs made for computers again, and suddenly console ports of those start being worthy of consideration as unique objects.
Right,
Right.
because
You could play Divinity and Divinity 2 and Wasteland with a controller and probably be okay.
so that's getting to the point where you're now able to, because those games are, harkening back to the Infinity Engine days, at least my
Yeah,
impression.
the olden times, yes.
Yes, to the 90s. And so now you actually have the horsepower in the consoles to do that stuff. You have all of the built knowledge of, making inputs for controllers to make that work.
Yeah.
In a way that wasn't there for Baldur's Gate.
You should
90s.
not play the PC or the console versions of Pillars of Eternity or Pathfinder.
But you can play the enhanced edition of Baldur's Gate.
But yeah,
console.
You can play the enhanced edition of Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale.
People sure do tell me that they've played those games on the Nintendo Switch.
You can play Baldur's Gate on the go.
You can play that on an iPad.
You can update. Yeah, well, that's the actual thing. Is the console versions of those Infinity Engine games kind of working backwards from the iPad versions, and it's like, okay, yeah, now it makes sense. Now we understand how to map these controls in a sensible way and streamline the UI in a sensible way.
When we record in the year of our Lord 2028 a podcast about the Outer Worlds, I'll play the Nintendo Switch version of that thing because I hate myself.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So, PC RPGs, console RPGs, it's now a Venn diagram that's basically now a circle. The Witcher 3 happens. It's one of the biggest games of 2015.
Yeah.
You have, CD Projekt Red is one of the biggest developers in the world off of their Grognard, RPGs they're putting on consoles.
A studio that started out making Eurojank has
Eurojank on a duct-taped version of the Neverwinter Nights engine.
A similar story with Larian. Like, they started out very thoroughly in the camp of Eurojank and then somehow correctly found themselves making Baldur's Gate 3, which won multiple Game of the Year awards and accolades.
So that's taking us to the present day in the 2020s.
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3. It's literally a Baldur's Gate game.
If your PC RPG is sufficiently big, it will still get a console port. And sometimes that console port will even be decent. And then there's Baldur's Gate, and we come around on this fun little dramatic irony, which is the part where for the Xbox Series S of that version of that game, Larian had Microsoft waive their normal feature parity clause for both versions of that console. And I think that's beautiful. That now modern console games have to make compromises for PC ports once again. Brings a tear to my eye.
So the CRPG console port is dead. Long live the CRPG console port.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good point to make. I gotta say, though, the number of CRPGs that I have played, just checking out new entries in the genre exclusively via Game Pass, it's been great.
Yeah.
It's great, dude. Because you can just play something for like 30, 40 minutes, figure out if it's got the right vibes for you, and then just, if not, cut bait, move on to the next one. And now, because of Game Pass, most of them are like 4 to 5 hours long, maybe 10 at max. Like the indie ones are pretty short and digestible.
So has there never been a better time to make or play CRPGs?
Probably not.
Probably not. I do think that there was a period of time where it felt like the tactics games were overtaking CRPGs, and then Baldur's Gate came out and kind of dealt that a blow. I still think that the go-to PC genre that is inundating both Steam and all digital marketplaces on console are the roguelikes.
Yeah.
They're still the bread and butter of those marketplaces.
I
But
guess
yeah,
your
you-
indie roguelikes, you get 20 a day. Literally.
Yeah, but with like CRPGs, you got almost all of the evolutionary branches alive. Like
Yeah.
you've got the Might and Magic branch alive thanks to Eastern Europe. You've got certain like weird offshoots alive thanks to Japanese developers. The Blobber is still alive. The first person dungeon crawler is still alive. There are still people making pause real time with pause. Like what, Braden? What
Look forward to
subgenres-
our Black Geyser podcast.
What subgenres are not representative
Um,
or not alive and well?
Like
I'm
in the
trying
last
to
10 years. Like
okay,
which
the last
RPG
in the
genres?
last 10 years,
Because
I
they're
think
all around.
I guess
Yeah.
the immersive sim is not in a great spot.
I would say like the traditional dungeon crawler is definitely still in a like this is for niche weirdos place. I would say there are not a ton of amazing like wizardry likes.
Although that new Wizardry game came out,
Yeah. Well,
and that looks good.
it's not a new wizardry game. It's the first wizardry game.
I think that we get an overrepresentation of the sandbox RPG at this point,
Yeah.
like to a nauseating degree, I guess.
But yeah. But now, yeah, the computer RPG side of things is in a pretty healthy place. You know, Microsoft is probably going to inevitably close both Obsidian and In Exile before either of those companies makes another isometric or top-down video game. Mark my words. You can call back to this when I'm vindicated in, let's say, 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, like the genres are also starting to blend. Like you get a
Yeah.
lot of new stuff.
Every
that are,
video
like,
game's an
blending it.
RPG now, etc.,
Like,
etc., etc.
I remember when people called Diablo a hack and slash.
I remember when people called Zelda 64 an RPG because there were no other games on that console to compare it to.
Yeah. So, was
But-
there anything from this podcast that we wanted to rank, or was this just us shooting the shit?
You
I
want
think
that
it would be very
Diablo?
funny if we ranked Diablo and
Pretty funny. And
and
Deus Ex.
also Deus Ex. All right, you can find our list at
let's
bit.ly
do it.
/OTDE rank. The URL, again, is bit.ly /OTDE rank. And I'm
Okay.
pulling it up.
So, PlayStation Diablo.
Is
At
it
the
better
top of
or-
our list
Oh, okay, yeah.
is Might and Magic 6, The Mandate of Heaven, a PC RPG that was not ported to any consoles. However, Might and Magic 8 has a Japan-only PS2 port that is once again very weird, but maybe not the way you should play that game. Not that Might and Magic 8's especially great, but you know. At number 2, Suikoden for the PlayStation. Number 3, Xenosaga Episode 1, Der Wilsermacht. Our bottom 3, we got a hot triple right here. At number 58, Unlimited Saga. At 59, Hoshiwo Miruhito. And at 60, Descent to Undermountain. But where should Diablo go on this list?
So, PS1 Diablo, is it better or worse than Ultima 9?
It's much better than Ultima 9.
Is it better or worse than Fa Xanadu from last episode?
It's better than Faxanadu.
Wow.
Okay, I've got.
Is it better or worse than Dragon Age 2?
I would rather play.
Let's, Braden, I've got a proposal. Let's start
Okay.
at Nox. Let's pit these Diablo clones against each other.
I think Diablo is better than weird off-brand Diablo.
Okay, so is it better than Hybrid Heaven?
Yes.
Is it better than Anachronox?
Yes.
Is it better than Saga 2?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes. It's
Is it better-
Diablo, you fucking...
Is it better than Risen?
Yeah, is it better than Risen? Probably.
I mean, listen, you
we
me
love
and
you
my
some Eurojank, but
my Piranha Bytes, but no.
also
No.
Piranha Bytes, we now officially can say Piranha Bytes rest in peace.
Pour one out.
Pour one out to the kings of Eurojank. It's just down to you, spiders, because Larian's too good for Eurojank anymore.
Also, solidarity with the striking Spiders employees. It sounds like the early access version of Greedfall 2 fucking sucks.
Man.
All right, so I'm going to stake my claim.
Yeah.
I would rather play the Biomotor Unitron than PS1 Diablo.
Okay.
That's fair. That's
I-
fair, because I was going to actually say I think I would still prefer to play Digital Devil Monogatari
Okay.
over...
Okay.
The PS1 Diablo
I mean,
Yeah.
it's still Diablo.
on the PS1.
Yeah, but it's that game.
It runs.
It runs worse and
Badly.
it looks worse, and it controls messily,
Suboptimally.
suboptimally. Okay,
But do you
if
know
you're saying
what
this
looks
is our
good
new
and
number
controls well?
23,
Yeah,
Yes.
so we're going to
I'll
put it
accept
above
that.
Fast Xanadu, but below
Well,
Biomotor
Biomotor
Unitron.
Unitron, fine. I will accept this ruling.
Now, Deus Ex on the Play Stallion.
Deus Ex: The Conspiracy for the PlayStation 2.
Okay.
Okay, so where do we start here? Is this better or worse than Jade Empire?
It's better than Jade Empire. It's Deus Ex.
So you're saying this is better than Ultima 9?
Let's
Yeah.
go up a couple.
Is this better than Ease 3?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got the
It's-
flaccid penis sword. Sure.
It's still Deus Ex. It's not the way you should play Deus Ex.
Okay.
So is this worse than Anachronox? Let's get a top end here.
I mean, you know how I felt about Anachronox.
I played all of Anachronox. I'm like, you two cowards.
Yeah, because I was
Yeah,
having a
because of
bad time.
Anachronox.
I would put Deus Ex: The Conspiracy below Saga 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
I
so
can compromise.
27.
Yeah.
New 27.
Yeah.
Because
it's
I was
the
going
new
to say
number
it was
20.
going to. I'm not going to allow it to go above Risen. So
Yeah, no. Risen's too low, if anything.
it should have had a fucking concert in it, Braden. That's what could have saved it. That could have put it in the top 10.
No, the game with the concert in it is all the way down at currently number 45. Okay. Our new number 28 is going to be Deus Ex: The
27. Oh,
Conspiracy.
yeah.
Which is,
And,
once again, not the I just want someone to come into the Discord very angry. They're like, how dare you rank Deus Ex this low?
And we're not ranking KOTOR, right?
No.
No.
Here's where I rank KOTOR. I can't, because it was very important to me as a child. And as an adult, my mind has
Okay.
been so poisoned against
Okay.
BioWare.
I have an idea for a KOTOR podcast, okay?
Uh-huh.
It's just the Old Republic.
It's you, me, and then we record it with Gino, and he's never played it before, and we have to listen to him talk about KOTOR and how it doesn't make sense to him, and how he doesn't like the Star Wars.
Does Gino not like Star Wars?
Hey, he's an agnostic on Star Wars, but just imagine us with all of our innate nostalgia for KOTOR having to listen to someone.
I think the last time I
No,
played
we could play
KOTOR was
KOTOR
about
too.
a decade ago.
See, here's the problem. Like, technically, for Off the Deep End, KOTOR 2 is a better fit for us, but KOTOR 2 presents some moral
KOTOR
hazard.
2 is going to lead to me getting stabbed in an alley or attracting the discourse.
I'll say the thing that I think you're gonna say. I think that the modding community has done an admirable effort of doing that
Also,
patch with all
yeah.
that stuff, but it is super ancillary and it's very janky still, and I don't know if I actually enjoy playing the game with it.
Yeah, there's simply the part where with KOTOR,
Some of that stuff got cut out for a reason.
some of that stuff got cut out for a reason, and we're not even talking about the droid planet, which
God, the droid planet. Oh,
the fact that people took that droid planet, which was like a handful of environments and some broken scripts, and said, no, we're gonna remake this. We're gonna make this entire thing, which was clearly cut fairly early in development.
And then it's a fetch quest with a bunch of the designers of the mod voicing the characters, and it's painful.
So then you should make Gino play vanilla KOTOR 2.
He would play it on a PlayStation.
He would play it because he's like, I don't know how to use these mods. I've never touched a computer.
You know, the weird thing
Make
is,
play the
though,
Xbox version.
that M would fucking kill him. M would kill him because M loves KOTOR 2.
Oh, a weird. M loves KOTOR 2. Next she'll tell me she loves Dragon Age 2.
They're both good games.
Yeah. So supposedly.
I would prefer both of those games over
But no, we're gonna play the remake of KOTOR 1 that's totally gonna come out in our lifetime.
That's never coming out.
What
are we going to play instead, Chris? Let me tell you. It's my pick. We've already talked about it.
Yep.
The time is now. The future is here. Xenosaga Episode 2.
Ah, fuck. Yep.
I've convinced Jeff Rude to come out of his Northern Island retirement to play the video game with us. So he can go, it's not as good as the first one.
I forget. Did you not buy an actual physical copy of this game?
I have an actual physical copy of this game.
I don't
it's
want
not as expensive as my copy of Xenosaga 3.
That's right. You also have a copy of Xenosaga 3.
That's how this podcast got started. Was me spending $130 during the height of the pandemic on a copy of Xenosaga.
Here's the deal. I have
3.
preemptively started playing this game, and
yes.
I gotta say, first reaction,
it's a step down.
It's a step down. I hate the new characters designs. I hate them so much.
They replaced Cosmos's voice
actress is worse, and then also they just made I get that she was a sexy robot lady in the first game, but they totally made that be her personality in this game, and she's just not, the robotic inflections just don't work for me.
Boy, howdy, I can't wait to talk about it on the next episode of Off the Deep End. You can find me, Braden Arbitrary Water Redacted, on Twitch under the username Arbitrary Water. Where can they find you, Zombie Pie?
I'm on twitch.tv/zombiepie. Shion deserves better.
Where can they find you
in this game?
Adam Borkmaster Redacted.
I have a sports podcast on this very same feed called The Amateur Hour. It's about the football and numbers about the football and some very bad statistics.
You know what, Braden, just to piss you off, I'm going to play Xenosaga 1 and 2 for the Nintendo DS.
Okay. You go, girl.
Wait. Can we put an addendum? If we get X number of donos, we'll watch Xenosaga the animation?
Yeah, fuck it.
So
we'll probably do that by the time we play 3 anyway.
Guys out there, women, those who identify as neither, if you're still not donating to the podcast, we will do an emergency episode where we
give
watch
us money.
Yeah, pay us money. Some people say that Xenosaga the animation is actually good.
All I know is that Xenosaga 2 is considered the bad one. So I can't wait.
Quite get as crazy as the first, and I can kind of see why it's not the good one.
We can talk about it.
Oh man, you want that classic Toei animation style? Then force us.
We're gonna outlive the Confederacy so we can talk about all
Oh
three
right,
Xenosaga
we gotta
games.
celebrate like when we bring Jeff back, and we gotta do an anniversary episode. We actually did it, Braden. We had this last
we will
longer than
do
the
it by
Confederacy.
I believe like March of next year.
Mm,
I believe that's what the time frame is.
yeah.
Anyway.
Also,
Off the deep end will rise again.
Yes, Off the Deep End will rise again. Go see Megalopolis. It's fucking terrible.
But
I've
is
been
it
your host.
the right kind of terrible?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no such thing as cheating in a single player game. Goodbye and good night. Alright.
Okay.
I'm going
That's
to
the
hit off
recording.
on Craig.
Hi, Craig.
Bye.
Goodbye.